Hey guys, it's Scott Payne from PM Master Prep. In this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about the Create Work Breakdown Structure process. Now that's 5.4 in your PMBOK guide. Let's get into the details. All right, so where it says the last scope process in the planning process group. All right, so we've come a long way. We had a rough list of a ton of requirements and we refined those down, and we're all the way down in our previous process to developing a scope statement. That's the highly refined, very objective statement of what is inside the project and what is not inside the project as far as scope goes. All right, and so we're almost there. Our goal in this process is to get to a scope baseline. Now, this is going to be one of the first or the first of three baselines, project baselines you're going to develop in the project. So you got to know that on the PMP exam. 3 baselines. This is the first one, scope baseline. Okay, and so what we've done, remember we had in the previous process, we have a scope statement being created. And what Create WBS, WBS stands for Work Breakdown Structure. Create the Work Breakdown Structure. What that does, this process, is translates that scope statement, which we created in the defined scope process, into an actionable list of work that must be delivered. And that actionable list of work is, our scope baseline. Okay? And so that's what we're doing. And the scope baseline is made of 3 documents. You need to know this. You need to know these 3 documents. So the 3 documents that make up the scope baseline, scope statement, we already made it, it's in 5.2. The work breakdown structure, the WBS, and then the WBS dictionary. So you've got to know those 3 components of the scope baseline, all right? So creating the work breakdown structure, it utilizes and expands on the scope statement that we created to use so that we can create the scope baseline. So we know that. And then the scope baseline, what it really does, it creates the framework for what the project has to deliver. So this is an integral process. This is a very, very important process. And we have methodically gone in 5.2, 5.3, 5.4. Now we're here, we're defining this baseline. So cool, right? And then the scope baseline, which is the first of 3, like I said. And then the scope baseline is the approved version of the scope baseline, the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and the work breakdown structure dictionary. Whew, that's a mouthful, right? So I went through those again because it's very, very important that you know this foundational information. And the other thing, anytime I talk about baseline, as soon as we establish a baseline, any changes to the scope need to be put through what? A change request, right? So you don't even know the change request process yet. It's integrated change control. I'm pointing up there because it's further in the process. It's in monitoring and controlling, but it's an integrated change control process. So once we establish at the end of this and we establish our scope baseline, every change that's to the scope that's big, we need to go through the change requests. Okay. So that's the summary of what we're doing. If you understand that, you're well on your way to answering all these Create Work Breakdown Structure questions. Really good. So let's look at the IDO. We always start in the outputs, right? What are we trying to do here? Scope baseline. I've said it a ton of times. Scope baseline is what we're trying to do. And realize, as we go through this, you're going to update certain documents. You're probably going to update the assumption log and the requirements documentation, okay? But we're here to get the scope baseline. That is what we're trying to produce. All right, so the inputs. Let's think about what we might need. Obviously need the plan. Tell us how to do this. Then we're going to need the scope statement. When did we create that? We just did it in 5.3. And the requirements documentation. We did that a little while ago. So we need those things. And then what are we going to do? We're going to use expert judgment, subject matter expert type things. And then we're also going to use this technique called decomposition. Decomposition gets us to the work breakdown structure. And I'm going to teach you the techniques and how to recognize that. Very, very powerful. And you will have a question on decomposition. Just being able to recognize it, that's easy money, man. That is an easy one. Decomposition, the 100% rule. You'll learn those things and you'll be able to use it on the PMP exam. All right, so let's talk about our outputs. Scope baseline. It establishes the standard by which work is completed, by which the work completion is compared throughout the project. Sorry, I got excited. So let's think about that. It establishes the standard by which you're going to compare everything going forward. So very, very important. And it includes 3 documents. Do you remember those? Do you remember the 3 documents I just told you about them? Say them. What they are? First one, project scope statement. We already created that, right? We created it in the previous process. And it provides the scope description, the major deliverables, the assumptions and the constraints. And where do we create it? 5.3 defined scope. So as you're going through this, the reason why I'm asking you these things and asking you these questions is because I want them to recognize in your brain. I want you to remember them. There is no memorization. The PMP is not about memorization. We have to know 5.3. We've created the previous scope statement, and now we're using that in 5.4. It all flows. Now, this is something we haven't talked about. Work breakdown structure. What is it? It's a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope into smaller, more manageable work. And so what does that look like? It kind of looks like the chart that you have for your hierarchy in your company, right? The president at the top all the way down to the analysts. All right, so we talked about the work breakdown structure. Now there's a work breakdown structure dictionary, a WBS dictionary. And what that is it takes everything that's in the WBS and it gives you detailed information related to each component. Okay, so those things come together. Work breakdown structure, WBS, and the WBS dictionary. So we know that the baseline has a scope statement, the WBS and the WBS dictionary. You got that in your brains now. I know you do. All right, and so let's talk about the outputs. The WBS is the decomposition of the total scope to be carried out by the team to accomplish the project objectives and create the deliverables. All right, before we go further, I got to pause and talk to you about what work means, okay? Work in the PMP or PMBOK sense. So the work, when I say work, like work breakdown structure, work refers to the deliverables produced, not the activities that produce the deliverables. Now, when I first learned that, it didn't really make sense. I thought work is work, right? Dig a hole, that the actual act of doing it to produce the deliverables, right? No, it's the deliverables. Work refers to the deliverables produced, okay? So that's the different terminology of vernacular in this world. All right, so back to the WBS now. Now, the WBS represents all the product and all the project work. And we just talked about work, right? Work refers to the deliverables produced. So all the deliverables that we're going to produce are in the WBS. And it's organized visually, top down, right? We said it looks like a hierarchy in your company, from the president down to the guy that works in the mailroom. Okay. All right. So it translates the high level scope or deliverables into small, more manageable work. So it takes these high level things that we're going to do and it gets into small manageable work. That really makes sense, right? And each level of the WBS represents an increasing level of detail of project work. That makes sense. As you go further, it's more detail oriented. That's great. All right. And so the lowest level, this is a concept that you need to know. It's called a work package. That's the lowest level of work package. It's organized into control accounts. All right. And so you need to know, you're going to have a PMP question based on what is the lowest level of work? What's that called? A work package. You got the answer right. Each work package is usually given a unique identifier, and a number structure creates a code of accounts for these things. Okay. And so when you have this number structure in this organization, the work packages are summed up into control accounts. And this allows for the cost performance to be monitored, all right? So if we're going top to bottom, more detail as we go down, bottom of the hierarchy is the work package. That's what makes sense. So to reiterate, the work refers to the deliverables produced, not the activities that produce the deliverables. Okay, so let's talk about the work breakdown structure dictionary, the WBS dictionary. Now, this provides the detailed information on the delivery, the activity, and the schedule of every component in the WBS. All right. And then the information that could be included are a code for an account identifier, a description of the work, who the responsible organization is, etc., the cost estimate, just acceptance criteria. All the details for all these components in the WBS are all defined here, clearly defined so that we can use them. You think about how this helps us understand what our scope is. It's really, really good, and it's really, really defined. And so most of the detailed information in the WBS dictionary is created by other processes and added later. So you're not going to have all this information at the beginning. You could think like, oh goodness, how am I going to get all this information while I'm still in the planning process and early on in it, right? Well, you're going to have a lot of it, okay? But you're not going to have all of it. So you're going to get all of it as you start to iterate. That's great. All right, so we also said there's going to be certain project documents that are going to be updated as you create these. Assumption log, requirements documentation, new assumptions and constraints are going to be identified. And then requirements documentation, you're going to have approved changes that are going to result in changing the WBS potentially as you go forward, but always an approved change request. So that could be an output as you go and iterate on this process. Now the inputs, let's think about what we have. We know one input. Scope statement, we just created that. Requirements document, we talked about that. Those are the foundations that help create the WBS and help us get to that scope baseline. So we're going to use the scope management plan. It details how we build out, that hierarchical WBS. And then also we have this scope statement. It defines the work that's going to be performed and what work is going to be excluded. All right. So the in and the out, right? And the requirement documentation describes how each requirement meets the project business need. All right. So those are the foundational inputs that we use to do this process. Now, here's what documentation looks like. See, like top to bottom, this is from the PMBOK. This is a software product release 5.0. And what it's done is it's subdivided the scope into progressively smaller and more manageable parts. You see each column, right? And so the work package, that's the lowest level, right? The lowest level of the WBS is the work package. And it is the smallest amount of work for which cost and duration can be estimated and managed. So that's a good factor to remember. What is the smallest amount of work for which cost and duration can be estimated and managed? The work package. So if it's a little too high and you can't assess what the cost and duration is, you need to go lower and you get to the work package. So how do you create it? We talked about what we're going to do and the output, what we need on the input. How do we actually get there? And it could be created using a bunch of different methods and approaches, to get to high level. All right. And so you could do top down. You could start from the high level requirements and just iterate down and split and split and split till you get there. You could start at the bottom, grouping subgroups all the way up and getting to the high level requirements right there and working that way. Or you could have organization specific guidelines, in a WBS, or you could have some kind of template that breaks it out. So there's a lot of different ways to get to the WBS structure. But the one thing that has to be true is that the WBS should always follow the 100% rule. So what's the 100% rule? And this is something you do need to know for the PMP exam. Hopefully we'll have a question on this. Most likely you do. And you'll be able to get one right, definitely. So the WBS rule, the 100% rule says the total of all the work at the lowest level, what's that lowest level? Work packages, should roll up so that nothing is left out and no extra work is performed. Now that kind of makes sense. There's a certain elegance in that, right? Everything has a purpose and everything is useful. So we're not doing any work at the work package level that's not supporting the higher levels. So that's the 100% rule. You should know that. All right. And so what we want to do is we want to remember that each WBS component, it represents a verifiable product, service, or result. That's a big part of this. And then each level of decomposition allows the work to be managed more effectively. Like if it's a high level, it's hard to manage a big, wide scope right there at a high level. As you get down deeper toward the work package level, you can manage more effectively. That makes sense. And then what you want to do as you go down to the bottom is you want to confirm that the lower level components are necessary and sufficient to deliver the higher level components. And remember, 100% rule helps you do that. All right, so we just finished 5.4, and the big deliverable in 5.4 is what? The scope baseline. All right, so that's really good. We worked our way from requirements all the way down to the scope baseline. We've established one of the 3 baselines, and we're off and running on this project. Your next step is to follow the John process, is to go through the John story after this, listen to the video, watch it, and then answer the questions. Think through what you would do if you're in his spot. Think about how he develops his requirements, how he develops his scope statement. It's really going to help you get a certain perspective on it. Then you jump into the questions related to this one box, this scope box in planning. Answer those. Address your weaknesses. Go to the PM1 view, ITO inspector, all those things. Go through that. Try to address your weaknesses. And then let's move on. So I'm going to see you on the other side. Good luck.